Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. If you're on the East Coast, or good morning if you're further west. My name is Jenny Koch, and I'm a senior associate and planner with RHI Roadside in Harwell, based in Alexandria, Virginia. And today I'm here representing the APA Sustainable Communities Division, which is one of three hosts for today's webinar, which also includes representation from the APA ENRI, or Environment, Natural Resources, and Energy Division, as well as the Great Plains Institute. Today's webinar is eligible for one ASEP CM credit for live viewing only. Just search for this webinar title and you should be able to find it. As usual, we need to really acknowledge our great sponsors. Thank you so much to these organizations who helped the Sustainable Communities Division put on events like this webinar. Our sponsors for this fiscal year include several groups, we're thankful. Includes Clarion, Devon's Enterprise Commission, Dewberry, East End Land Planning, FAR Associates, HEF, Niche Engineering, Ideation Planning, Mars EOR, Robinson and Cole, Smith Group, TESCA, the University of Florida Online Masters of Urban and Regional Planning, the University of Utah Department of City and Metropolitan Planning, Urban Works, Urban Ecoplan, the Urban Collective, and VHB. So thank you very much again to all of our sponsors and to our division members who also contribute to supporting our work. Here's the Sustainable Communities contact info. We have webinars throughout the year. Feel free to find our recorded webinars on our blog site. If you're interested in getting involved, just feel free to reach out to us via any of these means, or you can also contact Matt Buchin directly, who's our chair and one of the presenters on the call today, and he will get you more info. His email will be up during the Q&A later. But that's all for some lead in to say today's topic is preparing to plan for climate change. What tools do we need? And so we've got four speakers today who are going to walk through some results from a survey that was completed looking at what tools planners might need to get ready for climate change. So before we jump into that, I'm going to give some brief introductions to our speakers. They've got their video on now, so you can see them. They'll give a little wave when I'm talking through their short bio, and then they may give some more background to themselves later when they speak. Let's see. The first speaker will be Matt Buchin. Matt is currently a director of planning with HEF Associates at the Austin office. He has over 24 years of public and private sector experience at the city, state, and special district levels of government. Over the last 9 years, Matt has worked as a consultant leading a variety of planning-related and code projects across the country. He also code leads HEF's community resilience efforts. Matt is currently the chair of the APA Sustainable Communities Division, as I just mentioned, and he is co-authoring APA's update to the Climate Change PAS report and is also working with APA's Legislative and Policy Committee to update APA's Climate Change Policy Guide. Our second speaker will be Jim Riordan. Jim is an environmental planner and senior project manager with Weston and Sampson Incorporated, where he leads the Urban and Environmental Planning Group. Jim is the current chair of the Environment, Natural Resources, and Energy Division of APA. But he is also the immediate past president of the APA Rhode Island chapter, the Rhode Island, and is also the Rhode Island Climate Champion for the Sustainable Communities Division of APA. You'll hear a bit more about the Climate Champions in a bit. And Jim is also a member of the Rhode Island State Planning Council. He's received the EPA Environmental Merit Award for his work on smart growth and stormwater programs, and twice received the Rhode Island Chapter American Planning Association President's Award. Our third speaker, Jessie Wyatt, is an energy planner and analyst with the Great Plains Institute. She brings experience from both the public and private sector, blending specialization in climate and energy planning with data analytics and GIS. You'll see a lot of data today in the presentation. Jesse has helped communities across the Midwest develop climate action plans and has also provided technical assistance on topics ranging from transportation decarbonization to renewable energy procurement. Our final speaker, Brian Ross, has 25 years of experience working on local climate, sustainability, and clean energy topics, including local government policy and regulation, state policy and rules, and energy utility regulation. Brian works across the Midwest and nationally with local and regional governments to develop renewable energy-ready policies and regulatory standards. He currently leads GPI's local and regional government technical assistance programs to implement sustainable practices for clean and resilient energy development and climate protection. So a lot of expertise on the call today. We're glad they can be here to speak with everyone. But before we jump into that, I just wanted to note we will have a Q&A at the end of the webinar where we can get have some back and forth on your questions. Please feel free to send those throughout the event. I'll be monitoring both the chat box and the Q&A function. You can see a little snippet of what that looks like here on the screen, the little question mark in the chat, in the comment bubble. So feel free to send your questions throughout, but we may hold them until the end to respond to them. Without further ado, I will invite Matt to kick us off.
Thank you, Jenny. Hold on one second. All right. Thank you, Jenny, and welcome everybody. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us today. We're really excited to speak with you about what most likely will become one of our defining topics of our careers, the topic of how planning can be used to advance positive climate change responses in our communities. And as Jenny mentioned today, today's webinar is being hosted by the APA's Sustainable Communities Division and is jointly sponsored by both the SCD and ENRI divisions and the Great Plains Institute. But the information that we're going to go over today is really a direct result of a grant given by APA's Divisions Council with the intent of strengthening our Sustainability Champions program, a topic that Jim's going to talk about just in a little bit. Following Jim's discussion, Brian and Jesse will go over some of the results of our climate planning survey, the one that we sent out a few months ago, and talk about next steps. But if you are in the position where you are interested in climate change, I think this is a pretty exciting time to be involved with APA. And I have to commend them for all the efforts that they are simultaneously moving forward on. One of the first is APA's Future Shape Research Agenda, which was a big research program developed by the APA Foundation. It identified climate change, resilience, and sustainability as one of the 5 research themes that APA wants to move forward on and to prioritize its research activities worldwide. So some of the priority research activities that they're going to focus on in the next couple of years are climate change effects and sustainability and vulnerability, needed land use and development changes, as well as planning, education, and training, which is pretty much some of the things we're going to be talking about here is how do we kind of advance that conversation. So the Division Council grant I just mentioned was a financial contribution to both the SCD and ENRI. It's how we partnered with the Great Plains Institute to take the next steps on how do we give tools for planners to move forward. We have concurrently going on, as Jenny mentioned, the update or a comprehensive update to the 2010 Planner Advisory Service or PAS report related to climate change. The current update is being sponsored by the Sustainable Communities Division and is due out in 2021. As one of the co-authors of that update, it is intended to create a comprehensive resource for planners to better understand those climate issues and the best practices with the intent of creating climate resilient communities. Our update to the Climate Change Policy Guide is also moving forward, as Jenny mentioned. That's an update to the 2011 Climate Change Policy Guide. It is also being sponsored by several members of the Sustainable Communities Division, and both Jim and I are helping to lead some of those efforts. The policies in the current draft are organized by APA's Sustaining Places for Comprehensive Plan Standards, kind of organizing a focus to make sure that's really, truly being comprehensive in the policies that it's putting forward. So it's organizing things by livable built environment, harmony with nature, resilient economy, responsible regionalism, interwoven equity, and healthy communities, as well as an extra focus on trying to provide the policy guidance for our federal and state partners. The guide is currently in draft form and has been submitted to the APA's Delegate Assembly. We'll be working through that process, hopefully with an adoption slated for approval in October. And then finally, another thing that's going on, as many of you already know, APA is moving forward with some changes to its CM credits for the maintaining your AICP certification. Right now, they're talking about taking those two topics, the 1.5 credits for law and for ethics, splitting those into 4 mandatory credits each an hour. One of those 4 each year or 2-year cycle will be focused on a special topic. APA's first special topic is the conversation about sustainability and resilience. And of course, that dovetails directly into the discussions of climate change, mitigation, adaptation. I think one of the important things about this special credit hour is that it truly raises the level of importance for this one particular issue, in this case, things that we want to talk about today, as well as the other important things that are going on at APA right now, like ethics and equity. And really what it does is help to generate some high quality educational sessions to better train our planners and our allied professions. So as I said, there's a lot of momentum within APA and its volunteers to help planners move these discussions forward. Next, Jim is going to talk further about the origins of the Sustainability Champions program and set the stage for some of the processes that Jesse and Brian will talk about in a little bit. Jim?
Thank you very much, Matt. This is Jim Reardon, Chair of the NREAD Division. Matt, I'd like to thank you for your leadership on this issue and the opportunity to have worked with you, particularly on the grant and this survey and presentation. Everybody that I've had the opportunity to work with in the sustainability and the Sustainable Communities Division has been just fabulous, and Henry really enjoys the opportunity to do cross-division efforts on this work. The Sustainability Champions program was originally developed in 2014, is intended to be a voice for the Sustainability Champions Division in the state chapters. The idea is to advance planning and networking around the divisions, across divisions, and around the nation. As the idea of this program is that champions are identified for hopefully for each chapter, and then are able to coordinate through bi-monthly meetings and at the national level to help do a better job of planning for sustainability throughout the nation. A key effort or a key aspect of this coordination and this effort was to try and establish tracks in regional conferences that focus on sustainability. As I mentioned before, it was piloted in 2014. The idea was to create representation in multiple regions around the country. You can see this map shows some of these areas. The right side of the map where the key was clipped off inadvertently here. However, if you'll notice the blue lines on the map, those indicate where there are sustainability committees that were formed for each chapter. And you can see the membership, darker green shows a greater percentage of membership in sustainability programs, or in sustainability committees, I should say, from chapter to chapter. A couple of key people and accomplishments as part of this program. This program was led by Ann Miller. and Brian Ross. Brian Ross is the same Brian Ross that is also one of our presenters today. So he's been great to work with, as has Ann. There are 10 sustainability champions currently in 9 states. There's a list of the states down below here: Colorado, Georgia, Illinois, Kentucky, Minnesota, Massachusetts, Nevada, Rhode Island, which is where I'm the current champion, and Texas. And with that, I'd like to turn it back over to Jesse.
Thanks, Jim. So as noted, I'm Jessie. I'm so excited to be presenting on this today in my work across the Midwest and sort of across the country in both climate action planning and thought leadership. I think, and I'm sure I'm not unique in this, we run into a lot of very similar challenges that communities are facing as they try to confront or tackle climate action. So the opportunity to participate in administering this survey was something that we are really, really excited about. So what you're looking at is sort of a project timeline for where we started and where we hope to end up with this initiative through that grant. And you'll see we worked with the climate champions to survey them on the questions similar to those administered through the survey. What we're talking about here today is the survey that we put forth to the membership of these 2 divisions. And then the next steps in the process, which Brian will talk a little bit about later, are the development of tools and templates for planners and practitioners with some review, and then putting that into action. So really excited to see what we learned from this survey move towards and flow towards implementation and measurable emissions reductions. So as I noted, we were really lucky and excited to participate in the administration of this survey. So the survey went out to the 2 divisions, SCD and ENRI. In total, we had 300 respondents who participated with an average completion rate of about 76% for any given respondent. And now I'll just take a little bit of time to dive into the specific responses that we received through the survey. However, before we do that, we wanted to make sure that you all on the call felt engaged and we got an opportunity to interface despite being in this online format. So we're going to do something called Mentimeter, which is a polling platform. For folks attending, you can either open an internet browser, or if you have a smartphone, you can open a web page on your smartphone. You're going to go to menti.com and enter the code 400306. And I may be behind the ball. I see folks already responding. So the first question is, what state are you listening from? And you should still have a screen in front with that code if you missed it in the slide previously. We're seeing almost a dizzying array of states come forth. There's a strong California presence in the center. We see Minnesota, Ohio, Michigan, Georgia, Texas. I'm running out of states. All in all, representation, it looks like, from pretty much across the country. I'll give people, especially with states with longer names, I'll give time to fill those out. But we're creating a beautiful little word cloud here. And I'll also note that so this is the first of 3 questions, and we just wanted to provide, this is hopefully interesting to everyone, but some primer questions to get you familiar with Mentimeter. We're going to be using it 2 times throughout this webinar. This is the first of those 2 times. So still seeing California really strong in the center, Minnesota, Pennsylvania, some New Jersey representation. And for those folks who are looking for the code, it is 400306, and that's without spaces. I'm loving it. I won't pretend to count these, but I imagine we're approaching 50 states. I don't see any territories represented. And we'll give it 3 more seconds. If there's anyone who is maybe still trying to get on. But all in all, great swath. We're excited to have you all on the call. Let's go to the next question. Maybe. There we go. So the second question is, what is your employer type? So on your screen, you should see quite a few options: consultant firm, city, county, indigenous or tribal nation, nonprofit, regional government, state agency, student, or other. We're seeing the answers come in live time. I hope this is as exciting for you as it is for me. We have a pretty large representation from consulting firms. A handful of folks are students, some local government representation with the city, counties, and regional governments, some nonprofits, state agencies, some others. And it looks like we're back to our similar engagement. Awesome. So it looks like there's a range of representation across employer types. And I'll also note this is a teaser for the types of questions we asked on the survey. So we're seeing who's on the call, and then you'll be able to see who responded to the survey and how those are similar or different. So we'll do the third question. And I do apologize. It feels like there's a little bit of a lag. There we go. So the third question, how familiar are you with local climate action planning? So on a spectrum of unfamiliar to very familiar, we'll start to see dots populating these. Lots of familiarity. Some people are unfamiliar. That's exciting. Maybe this is a foray into this world. So it looks like the vast majority of folks are very familiar or somewhat familiar. Great. All right, so now you're all experts in Mentimeter, and I'll give it 2 more seconds. And then we'll go back to the presentation. So now, thank you for participating in that. Hopefully that was fun. And with that, we can, oops. We can really quickly skip through a bunch of slides. Apologies for this. We can start going through the survey results. So the survey, in terms of sharing it with you, is broken into 3 parts. So we have demographic insights, where we were just trying to understand what type of planners were responding, what types of climate action do they work with, where are they responding from. We asked about completed climate actions. So what is the context for the climate action work that they're doing, if any? Does their state have any initiatives or climate goals, et cetera? And then we asked about the tools and templates. So really thinking about the next stage in this Climate Champions Program initiative and the grant effort for developing and helping prepare planners to do climate action work. What types of tools are planners and practitioners using? What types of tools do they feel like they need? And for that part, I will turn it over to my colleague, Brian Ross. To keep things rolling, I'll talk a little bit about the demographic insights. So as we asked you, we also asked the survey respondents, how familiar are you with local climate action planning? And maybe surprisingly, maybe not, results for the survey were very similar to the results for folks we see on the call today. So over 3/4, 77.8% of respondents were at least somewhat familiar with local climate action planning, which is great to see. And then I'll call attention to this white text at the bottom right of the slide, which is telling you that of the 300 folks who took the survey, 265 responded to this specific question. So this is indicative of that 76% response rate. None of the questions were mandatory, so people responded to the ones that they wanted to. So every response will have this white text, and you can refer to that to see what response rate we had for that given question. We asked about planning specialty. So participants were allowed to select all that applied, which is why the percentages are greater than 100 in total. Most respondents chose between 2 and 3 specialties, and we saw the greatest number of respondents practice environmental planning, sustainability or climate, or land use planning. And I'll call attention to the other, which captured a lot of maybe more niche or zoomed in specialties like innovation, hazard mitigation, energy or utility planning that may fall under the umbrella of some of the categories at right, but those planners are really diving in and focusing on those specific topics. And here was almost 100% response rate. We asked about employer type. As we asked you, it was a similar response again. So about a third working for a consultant firm, 20% or a fifth working for cities, some other, which at the initial point of administration of the survey would have or might have included Indigenous or tribal nations, which we realized was missing and added later in the survey. But once being added, none responded with that answer. So it may be captured in other, it may not. And then we had some student representation, state agency, county, regional government, and nonprofit, as you can see, were the two categories with the least representation. But what we really noted was that about a third of the respondents were the local government employees. So thinking about who is most likely to need, administer, or utilize tools and templates, it was about a third of our respondents of the 70% who responded to this question. We asked about planning experience. So how many years of experience do you have? The majority of respondents, so about 65%, had at least 3 years of planning experience, while a little under half had 10 years or more, so over a decade of planning experience that they brought to the survey, which was really exciting to see, with about 70% response rate. We asked about geographic representation. So what state are you from? As we saw the barrage of word cloud answers in the Mentimeter poll, we did see a big California, and here you'll see blue across the entire country on the map, but you'll see a very dark California. So good on you for representing your state. So that was about a fifth of respondents who identified that they work in California, but we did still see most regions across the country with respondent representation. We'll note, and you'll see in slides to come, that a small red flag was raised that seeing so many responses from California and thinking about, the state of California has a mandate for climate planning, and is that going to skew results? So in some questions, we did drill down and do that crosstab to understand, are these respondents answering differently than the other respondents? And we also did that with local government, so stay tuned for that. And then we asked, has your community or agency adopted climate plans or goals within a plan? So the response options ranged from other, I'm not sure, we do not, and have no plans to do so, maybe no, but we intend to adopt a plan or goal soon, to then these sort of green categories at the bottom. We have passed climate resolutions, but not yet adopted a plan or goals. Yes, we have adopted goals, or we have a full-fledged climate action plan or climate plan. So over 55% have at least resolved to adopt a climate plan, which is great to see. Maybe less surprising because of the two, which two divisions were represented, but still exciting. Here we did that crosstab for California. Were they skewing the results? And when we pulled the responses for folks who were responding not from California, about 46% fell into those green categories in some. So at least resolving to adopt a climate action plan. And then I'll just note before I switch slides, the other captured things like participation in a climate or sustainability program. Maybe there's a plan in progress. Some respondents noted that their community may give deference to a state goal or plan, or they just felt the question wasn't applicable to their work style. All right, there we go. And then we did a drill down of the crosstab of just our local government respondents. So do you work for a city, county, or regional government? 71 of the 300 respondents did. What is their planning specialty? So again, they were allowed to choose as many specialties as were relevant. And here we see a huge representation in land use planning specifically, followed by sustainability, climate, long-term planning, community development, and others. And whether that's because local governments are often default to that sort of departmental divide and folks are housed in land use planning departments is something worth thinking about. But we still do see, the sustainability climate as very high ranking for the specialty in the LGU respondents. We looked at the same crosstab for the local governments of whether or not their community or agency had adopted climate plans or goals within a plan. And we saw parallel responses or proportion of responses where about 54% had at least resolved to adopt climate goals. So that was good to see. The LGU respondents were superstars, and 100% of them answered these questions. So that was also great. And then of interest in noting within the other that one or a handful of LGU respondents had noted that they had a plan adopted, but maybe felt that it was really outdated, so greater than 10 years, and there seemed to be varying interest with that type of update. So that was a consideration for those planners. So that's the demographic insights. Moving to part 2, the completed climate actions. So we asked, does your state have any climate action planning initiatives? You'll see the pie chart. Green is capturing the yes ands. So my state has climate initiatives, and I fall on a spectrum of familiarity as a practitioner with those initiatives. So dark green, yes, they have them, and I'm very familiar, all the way to the light green. Yeah, I'm not super familiar though. And then we have in purple, about 30% of respondents fell into either no, my state doesn't have initiatives, or honestly, I'm just not sure. With that, we started diving into what types of things the community had specifically done. So this is where we get the text-heavy slides. We asked, has your community made changes to things like budgets, regulations, local infrastructure analysis, retrofit programs, or administration processes as a result of adopted climate goals? We pulled out the 3 most popular responses in the lighter green, and starting out left, we saw almost 36% of respondents had changed development regulation to implement goals, and that could under which could fall anything from solar EV ready zoning requirements to landscaping regulations, GHG mitigation requirements, or green building policies. So it was a broad spectrum of actions that folks had taken, but a wide number of them had done that change to development regulation. We saw a similar number of respondents had budgeted for climate implementation actions for internal operations. And then the greatest number of respondents had actually adopted internal guidelines or policies to reflect goals. And then we had others responding that they changed development review practices or changed infrastructure priorities or SIP. But on the whole, 20%, so had responded that they'd not yet taken implementation actions. So 80% of respondents had at least done something, which is awesome. And then we asked our respondents to describe what types of climate planning or carbon reduction actions the community or consulting firm had completed. And this question, we really wanted to focus less on the goal setting or long range planning, which we felt like we covered when thinking about whether they'd adopted a climate goal, et cetera, and really drill down to implementation. So given that you have this goal, what steps are you taking to make sure you can achieve it? We had 67 survey respondents fill in what was an open-ended answer, and those 67 survey respondents were all overachievers, and so they translated to, when broken out, 152 separate actions, which we then categorized into these broad action areas. So by far, the most common type of action was that development regulation, which included zoning, followed by clean energy. And things that fell under the clean energy category were maybe clean energy procurement for municipal operations, working with utilities on renewable energy goals. Some responses discussed maybe partnerships with businesses or political figures to think through or advocate towards moving away from fossil fuels. And that was followed by analysis and data collection, which was anything from a GHG inventory to a vulnerability assessment to collecting VMT data. And then we had a handful of actions associated with local government, budget, financing, and SIP, development review. And then the least common actions or type of actions were the technical assistance and education, which ranged from technical assistance and education from a third party to the community, or from the community to their constituents or residents or community members, and then the peer network or cohort. And this, I think, had, of all the questions, which is fair, was open-ended, the lowest response rate. So about a fifth of respondents filled out this question. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brian Roth. Hopefully that was illuminating. And he's going to talk through the tools and templates portion of the survey, as well as next steps.
Okay, thank you, Jesse. That's a great summary of the survey and all the results we were getting, and kind of a capture in the picture of what planners have done and what their knowledge level is about climate action, local climate action planning. So what we wanted to focus on next was what are the tools and templates that planners need in order to do their work around local climate action and carbon reduction outcomes at that local level. So we had just a couple of questions, and these did get somewhat kind of complicated and wordy, but we try to simplify it down to where we could present it here. We allowed respondents to select everything that applied out of this universe of responses of different kinds of actions, or I should say different kinds of templates that they think that they need in order to do this work in their jobs. The top four responses about in terms of identifying needs were kind of bundled at the top in that darker yellow, including that they would need to have examples of climate actions for specific sectors, and that's kind of things like what do you need to affect climate in the transportation sector? What do you need to in the environmental or carbon kind of sequestration kind of elements in your community? Buildings as a sector, those kinds of things are the examples that would be in that top category. Then we also asked whether they needed climate actions for different city types, because in our work with different cities, we've discovered that that there is a frustration sometimes with the examples that they all seem to come out of, for instance, large cities, and small cities need to see different kinds of actions in order to be comfortable knowing that they're adopting best practices. We asked whether they wanted example ordinance language, so kind of how do you take a climate goal and then actually put it into zoning ordinance or subdivision ordinance in terms of kind of implementing those goals. Do you need data for setting or measuring progress? This is something that, again, that we've discovered that sometimes becomes a barrier in our work for local governments to take action. We asked whether they needed more specific kinds of templates, such as how do you actually administer the goals in the development review process. For instance, do you need a findings of fact checklist that relates to climate action, or development agreements, examples of those that relate again to specific kinds of local climate goals. Networks or cohorts is for peer-to-peer learning, and then a couple other categories, other, and this really does not apply to my work. And you can see the different kind of elements. I described those in some detail. The top four kind of all came in together, and the next four or next two a little bit less popular. So, kind of using the same tools and templates, we asked whether or not they felt the first question obviously related to what do you think is most useful to planners. The question we just described, used the same categories to ask them what do you think is missing. So the first question was really about what's most useful. Obviously, some of those planners who responded had already felt like they had those tools and templates available to them, and this is about what is missing. And interestingly, we did see a different ordering in terms of what was missing. The top one being that planners are most frustrated by, or in terms of implementing climate action, getting data for setting or measuring progress. That data question about how do I actually know how much carbon emissions is coming from a particular sector in my community, or where do I get energy data that's specific to my community? Those kinds of questions were the ones that were most frequently cited as being missing or lacking, and that's the one in the black color there at the top. The next three were all kind of approximately at the same level. That was, we don't have templates for development review or development agreements. We need examples of climate actions for specific actions, and we need example of ordinance language that integrates climate goals. And then a little bit smaller category there was the example of climate action goals for different city types, and then networks or cohorts for peer-to-peer learning and other. So we did see kind of some interesting results about what was missing in the current kind of portfolio of tools that planners have. And this obviously is something where it was key to us as we're going through this project to kind of understand where we should be looking to enhance the ability of planners to move ahead, because the next step in this process after the survey is to actually develop some tools and templates, or to create some inventory of tools and templates that planners can use in order to achieve their goals. So we are using the kind of results of this survey to direct the rest of the project work, and we did have some planners who did submit some examples that we'll be pulling from of templates that they're already using that we can maybe publicize to the larger universe of planners through this project. And we are going to also offer an opportunity now to you who are participating in this webinar to kind of chime in as well on this, both in terms of what you think is needed and where you think you might be able to help us in terms of identifying tools and templates and other kinds of advice to move the planning profession forward on climate action at the local level. So why don't we go back now to the Mentimeter slides, and we will have a couple of additional questions that we want to ask you. The first one is basically to answer the question that we just presented to you from the survey, which is what models, tools, or templates would best enable planners to achieve climate or carbon reduction outcomes in their work. And we simplified the answers. It's the same 6, but rather than write it out the way we had, we simplified the answers a little bit so they'd fit on the screen. And that is, you can see there, example actions for specific sectors, example actions for different kinds of cities, examples of ordinance language that implements climate goals, templates for development agreements or development review process, better data so that you can track progress or set goals, and more access to networks or cohorts for peer-to-peer learning. So we have a lot of people or people starting to respond. This is a little bit more complicated question, and we're asking you to rank these. So people, you can see things are moving around, and so we're going to give you a little bit of time to go through that ranking process. So you can give, among these 6 items, you can say which is the most important and which is the least important in terms of kind of helping you in your job, or what you think other planners might need. I'm trying to remember what the results were from the survey to see how aligned this group of people is with the people who are surveyed. Example ordinance language right now is kind of in the top rank, which was not the top rank in the survey, but it was very close. In the survey, we had four items that were actually very close together. So I'm just going to pause here and let people have an opportunity to go through the ranking process. Okay, we have 50 people who have responded. We had about 100, I think, actually online earlier in the presentation we did. And I believe that you can well, let's see, I guess, no, I guess when we move to the next question, you can't respond to this one anymore. So this is pretty important, so I'm going to just give another another minute here to people to respond, because we definitely want to see what you guys think in terms of the ranking. And we have had example actions by sector has just surpassed example ordinance language in the rankings. Okay, so actually in the end here, we ended up with the same top 4 that we did in the survey. The top 4 you see here are the same top 4, a little bit different ordering on them, but it's the same tools or templates that would best enable planning. And the bottom 2 are the same as well, templates for development review and better opportunities for network cohorts or peer-to-peer learning. So example actions by sectors is top, ordinance language. The data question is just behind there on 3rd, and then example goals or strategies as the 4th. So Jesse, why don't we go to the next question, the final question on Mentimeter. And this is opportunities for future engagement. And what we want to know is whether or not you who are listening on here are willing to help us identify the things that we should be moving ahead on, whether or not you're willing to participate in the Climate Champions program that we're kind of integrating now into our Champions program. Whether or not you have examples or resources that you can provide for us. Whether you're willing to help review tools or templates. Whether you think you have an opportunity to help publicize climate action opportunities. Or you don't have time at this time, and you can answer that as well. So we are not actually going to show the responses to that question because the follow-up question on that is that we would ask people that if you are willing to do something, that you provide us your contact information. So we didn't want to put that up on the screen in case someone didn't want that showing up in this national webinar. But let's give people an opportunity to kind of go through that a little bit. And then we will move very quickly here to the question and answer period. So if you have questions that you would like us to go ahead and answer, the Mentimeter is still open, so you can continue to answer that question, that final question about helping us or volunteering on either the Climate Champions program or to help us identify information. So I'm going to hand it over to Jenny, I think, to administer the question and answer section of the webinar.
Great, thank you, Brian. I think our speakers are going to turn on their video again, or some of them will, so you can see them as they answer your questions. Please do feel free to put more questions in the Q&A tool or in the attendee chat, and I'll be taking a look at that. The first question I will say is from John Porterfield, and it's quite a long question, so I will likely not read the entire thing. But I think what John was bringing up was that it was not clear to him how planners know certain things related to climate planning, resilience, and adaptation. And so he sort of had a list of things that are useful for planners to know in these efforts, sort of a two-part question. And so, Matt, I think you said you were going to take a shot at responding to that. Oh, I think you're muted.
John, did you get that answer? Thank you. Appreciate it. John, great question. Fantastic question. It really hits it on the mark. As part of this process, we were really trying to identify what our planners knew and what is already being advanced out there. As part of my kind of co-drafting of APA's climate change planner advisory service, or PAS, report, what I've come to find is that there is a ton of material that's out there. We just haven't done a great job as part of planners to pull that together and kind of disseminate it and communicate it with our planning community. So some of the specific responses to your direct questions: how do we know? If we think about some of the research that's out there, the United States Global Change Research Program, every 4 years, they're mandated by legislation to prepare a very comprehensive report that answers a lot of these questions. Right, it's typically divided into two volumes, kind of a summary of what's out there in the science, and then the second part, which was last done in 2018, that the National Climate Assessment 4 talks about the responses and what we need to do moving forward. That process, as well as the work that comes out of the International Panel on Climate Change, is all really based on kind of the review of peer-related articles and information and research that's been done to answer some of these questions. So here's really the summary. There is full consensus about where we know our climate change impacts are going. Well documented in the science. We know what the issues are. Inherently, we know how to fix them. What we don't know is what the global response to mitigate increases in greenhouse gas emissions will be. So when we think about how do we know what the exact implications are going to be, the answer is we can't definitively say that, because it really depends on how we all respond in correcting some of our issues. But what we can do is that we can communicate the information, we can understand where the impacts will be based on certain science, and we can start to prepare a response that has flexibility in changing the course of action depending on how great the response from the global climate community is. So what I mean by that is, if we are able to comprehensively and quickly respond to some of these issues we're dealing with, greenhouse gas emissions, we may not need to go as far with some of the mitigation adaptation solutions that will be required. But we won't know that until it's later. So we need to start preparing now. We need to design flexibility in our projects, our policies, our ordinances, so that as we get more definitive knowledge on certain things, we can start to ramp down some of those responses.
Great, thanks, Matt.
Yeah, and if I could just add very briefly to that, one of the things that we have seen when communities set specific climate goals for themselves, they obviously sometimes don't know where the emissions are coming from in their own community. As a local climate plan is looking with kind of emission responsibility just within the community, and those data sources are pretty critical to identifying where those emissions are coming from. And there are once you know that, there's specific tools to use. But I should also note that there are the climate goals of mitigation are also supplemented by what we would call co-benefits, which kind of do get to some of the resilience questions that Matt was talking about, but also other kinds of benefits, such as if you're reducing auto emissions in your community, that has a climate impact, but it also has a health benefit that's quite discernible and definable, and has big equity considerations in the larger communities in particular, where we have minority populations and low-income populations that are particularly exposed to those kinds of emissions. So there's a variety of community-scale co-benefits that accompany a lot of the climate benefits that you get out of mitigation efforts.
Great, thanks to both of you. The next question I'll read, and any of you can feel free to answer because you're working on several efforts. Becky Soglin asked, are you coordinating with the Urban Sustainability Directors Network?
Hi, how you doing?
I'll take a quick stab at that. We are coordinating. We are working. Great Plains Institute is working not only with APA, but with a variety of other organizations. And we do have some connections to the Urban Sustainability Planners, Urban Sustainability Network, USDN. The one thing that we do is we work with an organization that's a little bit broader scale than that, called the Sustainable States Network, which is statewide programs that help local governments on sustainability issues. There are 12 states in the nation, actually 13 now, that have statewide programs to help local governments, and many of those are directly being integrated, or I should say our USDN communities as well, and are participating in both of those efforts. The Sustainable States Network has about 1,600 communities that are participating across the nation in those different programs. And most of the USDN communities are part of that effort, as well as those state initiatives. We're also coordinating with USDN on some other specific initiatives that we're looking to in terms of integrating some of the tools and templates. And Becky, we should probably have a conversation directly, to make sure that we're moving stuff ahead. I know our USDN communities that we work with are find the materials from USDN very useful in their climate action work. So those are actually some really good tools to use that planners should be aware of as we move ahead. Jesse, did you have anything to add to that?
I think you covered the bases there, Brian.
Great. I know we just have a few minutes left, so I'll go to the next question. Let's see. Jonathan Harker asked, Oregon has statewide planning goals that are mandatory for local jurisdictions, as well as special purpose districts and state agencies. Those goals in Oregon have never been updated for climate action, nor is there a climate goal. So the question related to that is, are you seeing jurisdictions or states updating state planning goals or updating comprehensive plans for climate action? And do you have a list of those that have made those updates?
I can answer that for the New England area at least. We're definitely seeing states updating those goals. Some of them are putting together their own climate resiliency plans at the state level. Certain states, like the one that I do most of my work in, Rhode Island, have, like Oregon does, state goals or state standards that municipalities are required to meet. And in the case of Rhode Island, at least, they do include climate resiliency planning goals. And we're seeing municipalities pick those up and include them in their comprehensive plans. In some other states, those are called master plans, but the local municipal comprehensive plans. I know that kind of stuff is going on around Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey. Further northern New England states, such as Maine and New Hampshire, are also including that sort of standard. And I know that stretching down the eastern seaboard, we're seeing more and more states do that. I don't have offhand a list of those states, but I think that is the sort of thing that we would probably seek to include as we're working towards developing example guidances and materials that would be posted on APA Learn.
And I know we're at time, but I'll just really add, I think that's super helpful, but we've also been seeing regional planning organizations or metropolitan planning organizations utilizing a similar approach to say we mandate comprehensive or oversee comprehensive planning processes within our metropolitan region. We're going to require, mandate, but also educate and provide technical assistance around how to integrate things like climate sustainability and resilience. And we've been seeing that in the Midwest, and Minnesota is a great example. I also don't have a list, but I know there are a handful of others.
One more thing I would add is that in Massachusetts, they've actually started a grant program called the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program, which allows the use of grant monies to prepare municipal plans so plans at the local level that are required to include various actions that then make those communities, once those plans are approved, then make those communities eligible for action grants. I don't know that I've seen that program replicated in any other states, but if you're a planner who's interested in putting that sort of program forward, I'd suggest you take a look at that Massachusetts Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program.
And I'll just add that there were some states, a number of different states that had kind of the program that Jim was just describing, and actually the kind of setup that was originally, it was described in the question in Oregon, in place for some years, and they did not include climate necessarily. A few, like the state of Iowa, actually has goals for renewable energy that they recommend to go into their kind of comprehensive planning network, or comprehensive planning guidelines that communities use. And a lot of Iowa communities, when they do comprehensive plans, are actually following those guidelines. But what we and then we have seen a large number of states that have been adopting statewide goals. It's been accelerated just in the last couple of years. And the dilemma that we as planners have, a lot of times the state goals are set without really being cognizant of how they get translated down to the local level. And I think Oregon is one of those, is probably in that bucket. And one of the things that we're trying to do is work with states. When I say we at the Great Plains Institute, is work with states to kind of make that translation effort to say, okay, here's the state goals. The state needs to in turn look to the local governments as a vehicle for implementation for those goals, because the cities themselves and the counties have the opportunity to both be leaders and to make those goals a reality, because all development ultimately is local, that we have to take advantage of, but also sometimes, unfortunately, to be an obstacle to those goals. And by engaging local governments in the state planning process, you actually have a much better opportunity to create an environment where you're going to have a collaborative effort across jurisdictions and really achieve those goals. And I will note that Jesse's point about the regional governments is really critical. I'm glad that got put on the table. We see a number of regional governments that have stepped up and taken advantage of just filling the data gap. Sometimes the Delaware Valley regional government in Philadelphia has had in place climate data at the local level that communities can use for a number of years. The place that Jesse and I work in Minnesota with the Metropolitan Council is similarly stepping up. I believe the Chicago area regional government has done that as well. I'm more familiar with the Midwest. I think the Kansas City may have done a similar thing. So you do look to your regional governments. You can much more cost effectively do a region in terms of data gathering and dissemination at the local level than you can city by city. It's a way to get to scale that's really critical, and then regional governments can play a great role in that.
Great. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, everyone who's on the call today. I know we're a little over time, but there are still some questions. So what we will do is work to get some responses to those questions and send those out via email to all of you who are on here. So thank you again for participating on this. If you know someone who was not on here today and you think they really should be a part of this interactive discussion, please let them know. Registration filled for the event today, which is great. So we have scheduled another run of this next on August 6th at 2:00 Eastern. And so you can find, if you go to sustainableplanning.net, that is the APA Sustainable Communities Division blog site. And so you can find the link there, or just email any of these folks that are listed here, and they will get you the link to that. So again, thank you to all of our speakers. Thanks to all of you for sitting in on this, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.